This episode of Between Turns is brought to you by the 15 minutes of this episode we had to cut to produce a deluxe version of this episode. We understand the irony.
Ta-da!
Yeah. What you been playing?
What have you been playing, John?
Duel of Ages.
That's good times.
Mm-hmm. But you already knew that because we just talked about it.
Because we just talked about it for 45
and
minutes.
We're not going to talk about it again. Oh.
It's not a good podcast unless I laugh. So saith me. Yeah. So you've been following this container thing anymore?
Beyond the rants that I witnessed the other day, no.
Yeah, it's still escalating. It's pretty great.
Really? How could it get worse?
Just because it's the internet, right? So, that's how it gets worse. Yeah, it's just.
Well, I mean, I guess the more sensible question is, what's the state of the issue as it stands presently? Because I don't know.
Yeah, right now it's set at container was a big reprint was announced, deluxe 10th anniversary. Giant size, big ships, big containers. This game's been out of print for years, and now they're bringing it back. So they've decided to make this a big deluxe edition. They're charging $80 for it, I think, somewhere in that neighborhood. And, it's supposed to be the deluxe edition. So not only is it coming back into print, it's going to be the collector's edition. So super big pieces, super nice, super fancy. Everybody's super excited about it. But the original game was designed by these two gentlemen, Thomas Ewart and Franz Benno de Long. And this new edition has apparently sort of been reimagined by this third gentleman, Kevin Nesbitt, who is one of the owners of the company that is republishing it, Mercury Games. And supposedly he was the third designer of the original game. He wasn't credited, or I should say he was credited as a developer, but
have the original two designers come out to give any?
Well, Thomas Ewart, as far as I know, has not said a word about it. The second designer, Benno, unfortunately passed away back when the original game was published. I think he had actually already passed away when it was published. So the input from the original designers I haven't seen, but the publisher has claimed, and I have no reason not to believe him. I mean, this isn't I'm not doing the silly thing we've done before where, it's like I'm talking out of the side of my mouth because
it's okay.
He's anyway. A fraud. But no, there's no reason not to believe that everything he says is the absolute truth. Mm-hmm. And it's that the development he did on the game was, it was such a large part of the game that he should have had a design credit on it. And he didn't take it. I'm not sure why. I think it might even had something to do with the other gentleman passing away. Just out of respect, he didn't. He was just kind of, giving up his thing and just making sure the game got made. But the part of this that gets a little hairy, because no one minds that he takes a designer credit. I mean, no one does. I mean, like I said, there's zero reason to believe he is not 100% telling the truth about this. By all accounts, he's a great dude. So that's not what this is about. But the controversy is, since the design is mostly his, and he had such a big impact on it, he has decided to retweak what ends up being kind of a substantial part of the game, in that he has decided to shorten the game because he feels it runs too long, and the method of doing that is that he has removed components from the game. In the original edition, there was 100 containers, and the game end condition is dictated by when those containers are exhausted, like when I think it's 2 or 3 colors are out of the supply. And he's removed a few, like 5 containers from each pile, so that essentially you run out faster, right? And what that has done is it knocks quite a few turns off the game. And not only has he adopted that as the main rule, but now those components, because they're no longer needed with this new edition, they're not going to be in the box. And this has just stirred up a hornet's nest, because this game has kind of become a little bit of a modern grail, especially in the last couple of years. Everybody in the world's been clamoring for a reprint. And it was announced that the reprint is coming. It's here. And then just slid in there real slyly was, oh, and by the way, we've made the variant that uses less crates a official rule. And since it's the official rule, those extra pieces aren't in the box. And now people that have become fans of the old edition, they can't actually play the original container anymore.
It's kind of the Vinos thing, where Vinos comes back out, modified rules, and as you showed me, the original game has this beautiful arc and everything. Had they not the presence of mind to package the original game in with the modified game, that would have been lost to the ages.
Yeah, absolutely. The argument that is kind of festering online right now is, is it right for the designer to just arbitrarily change the rules of a game? The people that are upset by this, they have very, very strong points about how the game is fundamentally a different game now. And the designer's take is that the game is the same game. It's just, instead of letting your engine run for 3 turns after you've built it, it does the Euro thing of your engine's assembled, you fire it once, and the game ends.
Yeah.
There's an argument for that. I mean, I get it. But the players that have kind of hit an expert level of play on this game, there's a lot of factors involved that need those extra turns. At a beginner level, maybe the game might stretch, but at a higher level of play, there's a lot of information to be gained in that time that seems like downtime. That's an avenue of victory. That's a way to play a long game. Buying your 4th warehouse or building your 4th machine or any of that stuff. If the game is really short, you don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of cutting off one of the avenues of victory, and it's kind of pushing the best strategy kind of down one lane instead of having this, maybe you play a short game, maybe you play a long game, maybe you kind of just react, there's all these things to do. And likewise, even the extra turns that are involved, there's a little bit of watching your opponent's behavior and predicting what they're looking for. And you use that knowledge to make yourself more money, and to make better decisions about what you should make and when you should make it, how you should price it. All of that stuff, you need to kind of been reading what your opponents have been interested in and trying to figure out what they want. And by lopping those turns off, expert players have lost the ability to kind of suss out that information. So it is very much an altered game and very much, I don't want to say a lesser game because I am not one of those pros, right? I don't have that level of play. I could get there, I'm sure, but it's just not a game that I have played that much to really know. But again, just like I said about the designer, I have literally no reason to believe that he's not being truthful about his involvement in the game. I also have very little to no reason to doubt these players that have played this game hundreds of times and lay down, step by step by step by step, exactly how this reducing the amount of containers and shortening the game time, how that fundamentally changes more than one strategy in the game. I have no reason to doubt that either. And it actually holds up if you go through, the strategy tips and the other things in the forums. You'll see a lot of that stuff echoed and brought up by different people. So it absolutely is a different game if you play it with less containers.
Well, you know where I'm going to go with this. George Lucas.
Yeah, right. Where else can you go?
I mean, I've never played the game. I don't know. I've not spent hours reading about it, and I saw the forums and that people were mad, and that's really about it. But to me, the core issue here is the classic issue that comes up when someone has produced something and people liked it, and then they modify it. And this happens all over the place, but most famously was with George Lucas reimagining Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been, kind of an amazing little discussion to have. Like, as a creative professional, right? It's an example I use a lot with folks, because when you make anything and put it out there, I mean, this happens to me every day. The thing that I put out is the best thing that I can put out that day. But 2 weeks later, I'm going to look at it and hate it, because I'm going to see all the stuff I could have done differently, better, etc. Right? Because I'm no longer in the moment. Maybe I've learned a new skill, or who knows what it is, right? And when you are a producer first, I shouldn't talk for other people, but my tendency is to always want to go back and tweak, right? Because there's a whole, perfection's the enemy of the good, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to produce anything, you have to acknowledge that it's not going to be perfect, because it's unobtainable on a timeline. And I don't mean a timeline like a project timeline, like a week. It's unobtainable in a human lifetime, because the idea of perfection for any one thing is going to change over the course of the generations, right? So it ends up being this impossible task. So at some point you just kind of have to say, this is what I'm doing, and I put out my work, and then later on I'm going to learn what did and didn't work. I mean, this is part of the process of growing and doing something by failure. That's a really long way for me to say. I sympathize with the I'm going to cut all that out. But anyway, I firmly sympathize with wanting to make something better, because you can, and wanting it to get closer to what I had in my head as the vision, or the feel, or the use, or the level of detail, or whatever it is for the thing that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
However, I also get really frustrated that I can't watch the original Star Wars. Even though I firmly feel all of those things that George Lucas has said he felt that made him decide, like, everyone's going to love this. Why is everyone mad? And he made that call to do the special edition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though I firmly acknowledge all of those feelings, I also just go, yeah, but you took away my Star Wars. Give me back this thing that was mine. Like, I understand it wasn't mine, right? But it was mine.
I feel like that is kind of a thing. Yeah. And I'm curious to see how you're gonna react to what I'm about to say. But
oh no,
well, no, just as you're very creative. You do a lot of artistic things. We've had this talk when we were talking about the gallerist. The difference between being an artisan versus being the commercial dealer. The difference in everything between those two people, and I feel something like you said, like Star Wars or Dune or, I think it happens with everything, but it really manifests in this pop culture stuff that at a certain point when you create something and you release it out into the wild and you let it live out there, I feel like it's not yours anymore. And, that is inherently what's wrong with Star Wars, with Special Edition. All of the cool stuff he did with, changing the matte backgrounds and everything, so that using digital touch-up so that, you couldn't see features through the walls of things because it was just like painted black, to, fixing the Vaseline smear for the land speeder. I mean, even Tatooine having a little bit more life in the town. That stuff wouldn't have sent anyone into a rage. I fully understand George Lucas wanting to make this, not only have this technology, let's make this more live. And I don't think anyone would be angry about, or the Death Star explosion looking a lot cooler, right? That's not a big deal, and it does enhance the thing, and it makes it more kind of palatable to younger kids, right? Because again, part of this is handing this off to a new generation. But the problem, and the reason everybody rages against it, is the classic, Han shoots first. Mm-hmm. And something like that this isn't a big deal, because that little thing fundamentally changes the entire course of the movie, because Han Solo's a major character and all of his motivations unravel. Like all of the, in a lot of ways, even his heroic journey, where he kind of starts off as a murderous pirate and ends up as a hero of the Alliance who is sacrificing his own well-being to help other people, and he's given up his own money to help other people. You know, he's risking his own life. All of that stuff that means so much is actually gone if Han Solo is a good guy who only hurts people when he has to at the beginning of the movie.
I've nearly bit through my tongue by now, just so you know. And this isn't going to be the Star Wars episode, but off recording, we'll have to talk about that one.
Okay. But, you know, what that illustrates, though, is because, well, at least from my theory that you apparently have a problem with, it does fundamentally change things, though, in a way that makes people go, hey, that's my Star Wars, you're ruining it, stop. You know, it's this story, this fable that I know so much about and I'm so tied to, you have fundamentally changed it, and you know, I don't recognize it anymore. What are you doing? I think that kind of represents what I'm saying about, you know, when it's like a baby, right? Or a little kid. You know, it's yours to take care of until it's old enough to kind of fend for itself, and when you release it out into the wild, it's no longer yours. I think that it's a big mistake for people to go back and change, make major changes like that. You know, like I said, it's fine to make it prettier. It's fine to add a little bit of accent to something, you know, or a little minor tweak here or there. But when you're fundamentally changing things, you know, you're going to get pushback. It doesn't even matter if you are right, you know, and looking at something, you know, like this container issue, the game container, it's kind of irrelevant if the changes to the game have made it better, right? Because that is a completely arbitrary thing as to how many containers were in the game, right? If it had been released with 85 containers, then all of those strategies and all of those gameplay angles, those would have already been solved, or they would already been, I shouldn't say solved, they would already been set in stone as the way people know the game and interact with the game and play the game. And this would be a non-issue. It's only because people got used to that 100 number and they're, you know, everything they know about the game is built around that. When this little change, which according to the designer is better because it makes the game shorter, there's less kind of wasted turns, there's less probing small auctions because those are boring, according to him, to new players. And he's probably right. He's probably 100% right. But that game has already been released into the wild, and I feel like it's no longer his anymore. Right? Even though he owns it, it's no longer his. Ultimately, the fight is silly. Right? Because while it's no longer his in spirit, it is his in the fact that he is putting up the money to print it.
Well, okay. Yeah, and I was also biting my tongue on that, because my response is, yeah, but he owns the rights. He's the publisher. He can do what he wants to do.
Right.
But I don't want to get into, you know, arguing someone's legal ownership of a property versus cultural ownership of an idea that property presented, or the ownership of something that has now become so significant in the culture that it's kind of part of our collective mythology, right? Because those are big discussions, and you know, we don't even have enough time to define the terminology, much less have the conversation. But the reason I bring up Star Wars specifically is because I think that illustrates a bit of the problem in going back and altering the principal property as titled as the principal property, because it ends up almost being a bit like historical revision when someone goes back to a film in 1977 and uses the technology of 1997 to make changes that were unable to be had at 77. I mean, beyond it just being something we all enjoy as a story, I mean, Star Wars is significant in the film industry for what it was able to accomplish and the type of movie it was, and frankly, how it was done at that time with what they had. And so when someone inserts a character that was impossible to have at that time, but passes it as the sort of principal artifact of, well, you know, this is what we should have had in 1977. Well, at some point, the word should disappears, and people just know that Star Wars came out in 77. the first CG character wasn't on screen until 1985. And so we're talking about 2 decades of history that have now kind of been tampered with a little bit. And that becomes problematic for people that are trying to use that history to learn how to either work in film and use that as a craft to tell stories, or even just advance the technology of doing it, or for that matter just us as fans of film as an art form, right? Not just fans of the story, but fans of the media. In a way, I feel like going back and adjusting the first artifact, it almost is a bit of a time traveler's paradox, right? Where everyone would have loved for Star Wars to have been as amazing as it ever could have been when it came out in 1977, but it wasn't possible in the actual timeline it existed with technology. So let's just let it be what it was and marvel in how it existed, because to go back and to alter that timeline is to sort of undermine the value of everything that came afterward. And that's kind of, I don't know. I think that's an important thing to sort of remember and just to evaluate when thinking about going back and saying something should have been done differently. But beyond just the planting a flag that says, no, I firmly believe that people can do what they want to do, even if that means fail, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sympathetic side to this that I force myself to extend to other people because I would hope that they would extend it to me. And that is that if the original product that someone presented was something that really got me excited and I enjoyed and was unique and fun and a beneficial inclusion in my life in some way, shouldn't I extend to them trust to do it again? Even if that means changing the thing that I thought was perfect? I would hope that any work that I did, that someone would look at that work and instead of just saying, that's the one, you should quit now and never do anything else, I would hope that they would say, I can't wait to see what you do next. That is a courtesy that I try to extend. And again, this is assuming, of course, that he was part of the design process and, and all sorts of stuff. But I'm in the general sense, I do think that there's a sympathetic courtesy that should be extended to people doing the hard work of making a thing. Because making a thing is a lot harder than it sounds always.
Right.
And if the original product was good, I do think a courtesy should be extended that says the second product could be equally as good, even if it's different, first off. But the flip side of that, though, is that I also do agree that there is this expectation versus delivery issue that comes up, where if someone came to me and said, I saw this thing you did, I want one of those. And I said, great. And then I presented them something that was totally different.
Right. And that's the crux of this.
And then they got mad at me. Did I have a right to do that? Absolutely. However, did I mislead them by saying that I understood what they wanted and then doing something different? Again, I'm not saying it's not a miscommunication, but I'm saying, like, hypothetically speaking, if someone says, I want this, and they point to a picture, and I say, got it, and they deliver something that doesn't look like that, there's going to be contention, and I shouldn't look at them and go, well, I had the right to do that. Of course I had the right to do it. However, they have a right to not pay me for it. I mean, that's the way that these things work. So I have to acknowledge both things simultaneously. And we have had this discussion before about a game that I really, really like, and that's Stronghold. Mm-hmm. If I can go there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Stronghold was a phenomenal game that was really early in the Portal catalog. And it's a game that just kind of fell in my lap, and I played it, and it's clunky. It's weird, and it takes a bit of kind of meeting the concept of the game halfway, right? That winning isn't winning. Winning a specific way is what's winning. But
winning is dying.
Winning is dying with flair.
Right.
But when you buy into that fiction and you buy into what the game is asking you to do, and that it's a race, it's not a war game, it's a race. Mm-hmm. That game is so unique and fun and just sings and is challenging. And when you get two people sitting there who really know how to play the game on a level that smooths out all the rocky parts of the turn order and sort of is the balm on the rough design, the game is phenomenal. I've adored it for a long time, and I play it as often as I can convince someone to play it with me. But when it got reprinted and it was titled as a reprint, it's a fundamentally different game.
Yeah.
The win condition is totally different. Several of the specific actions that you can take as an invader are now either modified or just non-existent.
Right.
And some of them have been teased out to be patched back in as expansions. But in many cases, those actions were key to the race component of trying to, win the siege. But that was a tough one for me because I adored this game. I've been telling people about it for so long, and then finally gets reprinted, and I tell everyone. I was sending out emails to people, go jump on this now. But then I immediately had to recall all those emails because I realized it wasn't the same game.
Yeah.
Enough had changed that it wasn't the same game. It's approximately the same space.
Well, it's almost another Han shoots first, and I know you kind of, we're going to push back on me on that off air, but it's the same thing though, right? Because if somebody out there hasn't played, it's the original edition, the one you are singing the praises of. The conceit the game has is that this is humanity's last stand against the orcs, and the orcs and the goblins and the ogres, this huge army of these monsters is closing in on the last human fortress. And the conceit of the game is there's no way to stop this horde. It's a 300, it's the last stand of the Spartans game. And the idea of the game is to basically hold out as long as possible. But you're not intended to win. There's no way you can win this battle. All the humans are going to die. It's just a matter of, can we hold these monsters off for X amount of turns? And in the reprint, that entire kind of tragic story is just gone, and now it's almost a even up fight, and the humans can very much win. And man, that again, I'm sure to somebody who's never played Stronghold before, it's a cool game.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt.
But if you are a fan of that old one, that narrative arc is fundamentally different. It's a totally different vibe. And I think people that were fans of the old one, you shouldn't just blow them off when they're kind of upset about, that aspect of it being lost.
Well, but in regards to Stronghold, it does bear mention that there were, I would say, more people that were vocal about not understanding the win condition of the original version of the game. Mm-hmm. Lots of folks that were pretty vicious about it online, saying this doesn't make any sense. Like, I win by losing, and they were very hung up on winning the game still means losing the battle, and that is just a logical leap they can't make for whatever reason, or refuse to make. Right. But so that was one of the reasons why I looked at the reprint again without that sort of typical compassion that I extend to designers, because I just thought he was caving to the peer pressure and just making the game that everyone thought they wanted, instead of holding it up and saying, no, I made the game I want to make, and if you don't like it, you don't have to play it. Mm-hmm. And this also was happening at a time though that we were starting to see a lot of Portal games come back but reimagined.
Yeah.
Yeah. and it's been the trend. I mean, Robinson Crusoe has now been completely revamped.
Right.
51st State was Imperial Settlers, and then 51st State again. This tends to be the trend. While I absolutely 100% understand the desire to always want to make it as good as it could have been, I also was just shaking my fist at the heavens going, leave it alone, man. Like, walk away. Make a new game. Yeah. It's a tough thing for me to square, because while I understand the mindset, I understand the compulsion to go back and tweak it to make it better. I firmly understand that. And I acknowledge the right of the person to do, mm-hmm. right? Because I mean, ultimately, it's the publishing company and the designer's pocketbook that's going to be affected by the decision. So it's like they can do what they want to do. I firmly acknowledge all those things. But then again, as someone who often is a consumer, to date, I'm only a consumer when I play a game. I also get a little irritated when they say reprint, and I've been telling everyone wait for the reprint, and then it's not a reprint, it's a reimagining. Especially when it just would have been a word, just a word. And to Portal's credit, they've started calling things second edition, which I appreciate, because it actually does denote, okay, this is different. And which is one of the reasons I've kind of backed off of. I mean, my frustration was very specific there. Yeah. And now that's been solved. Like, I can identify, and I can use those terms to identify people. Yeah. So with the container thing, if they're flat out calling it a reprint, and they're calling it the definitive edition of a game that's already been published, and it's the same title and is considered a reprint, I firmly understand why people are irritated. Yeah. Because if you're saying it's the same game, it should be the same game. If you want to package a different rule set as an expanded option, great. Bring it on. The more options to play, my favorite game, the better. But if it's a reprint, it should be a reprint. However, they also reserve the right, and I extended them the right to do whatever they want to do. So, shrug? I don't know. I mean, I can't solve it.
What it boils down to, I think, is as far as like who's right, both sides are right. I mean, I think both sides are 100% right. For all the reasons we talked about, for why the consumer side is right. On the publisher side, they are also, it's their business. They did the due diligence of figuring out how much this was going to cost to make, and, their margins, and, what it would cost to print, and how much it's going to cost for their molds. I mean, there's a lot that goes on into a game besides just having rules, right? I mean, there's there's a whole mountain of stuff that, they clearly know what they're capable of producing for a cost. But even though they're right in that assessment, I think they've made a big mistake in that it would have been a negligible cost to make the ship a quarter smaller than it is and print 15 extra containers, so the weight is all the same,
Maybe.
I'm sure maybe. It is. I would be stunned if it was more than a couple pennies difference between doing those two things. But they would have avoided all of this if they would have just left it 100. There's 100 containers in here. This is a new edition, how we think it should be played, and the extra containers are if you want to play the long game. They could have even said that. You know what? They don't even have to make it they could have made the original game the variant. That would have not confused anyone, right? Because people in the know, people that have first edition, like basically the people that are the most upset about this, it would have been like the new game has 85 pieces. Here's 15 extra pieces for the long game variant, and everybody would know that the long game variant was the original game, and everything would be hunky dory. So I think they've kind of made their own mess a little bit with that by just kind of trying to slide it under there. Because they're...
I don't know. There are lots of ways to parse it to say quote unquote right or wrong. But I mean, here's the deal: the people who have played the game a gazillion times, such to say those 15 containers matter. Mm-hmm. You know what? They already own the game, so there's probably a pretty good chance that those people that are really mad aren't the market, right? To begin with.
Oh yeah, I think that's clear even from listening to them. On other podcasts and other kind of interviews those guys have done. That's pretty abundantly clear. I mean, I would be exactly as worried as they are. They're looking at this as Grail games. Everybody wants them reprinted, but the fact of the matter is they're Grail games because they were pretty niche originally. They didn't have big print runs.
And as soon as they get reprinted, they're no longer.
Yeah, and that's this whole thing. You mentioned the Stronghold games doing this all the time, or Portal games. I'm sorry, I said Stronghold games because I'm about to go Stronghold games. But they brought out the edition. They brought out Crude, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Crude is it's a game about kind of speculating on oil wells, where you're digging oil wells, and when you strike black gold, you take all the oil and you send it off to either your refineries to get turned into gas, or you ship it overseas in the foreign markets. It's this pretty involved kind of economic game that has this little bit of a cool gambling component in it. And It was out of print for years and years and years, and then it got reprinted in Europe as McMulty, and that was actually an unauthorized copy. So, and there was tons and tons and tons and tons of them out there to where that almost became a Grail game. And it was actually a stolen design. Like, the original designer got no royalties, or he didn't get permission to publish it. This company just made it. And Stronghold, one of their big moves when they were starting out as a company was like, we're going to bring McMulty back. We're going to name it the original Crude, like the original game. And it's going to have super deluxe, all these giant, cool plastic pieces. I mean, it's like a toy box. It is super cool. But, and here we go again, the original designer for that game, and it is his game, he said, there's some stuff I really want to do differently if I had it to do all over again. And Stronghold Games was like, guess what? You get to do it all over again. Mm-hmm. And he made a couple, again, to a new player is probably a minor tweak. And if you learn the game, you would not notice anything different, like anything that was out of place with it. It would feel fine. However, people that knew the game, this little rule change fundamentally changed the arc of the game. I mean, it's almost exactly what Container was. Mm-hmm. And this game has kind of like economic climate cards, or like, they're like recessions and depressions and booms, and they change the pricing of everything basically. So the idea is to kind of expand your real estate when there's a boom, or be selling it off, and you want to be collecting the real estate when it's down, and all this other kind of stuff. But the original game was very dice dependent on when this changed. And the net result of that was every game kind of had a unique flavor, where you'd play some games and the economy would tank and it would just never recover. So you'd play the entire game in a recession from start to go, and then the next time you played, it could be like boom, depression, boom, depression, boom, depression. And you're just surfing it, and even when you were in a recession, you were kind of gambling a little bit. Like, we're going to pull out of this anytime. And you never pull out of it. You lose all kinds of money, or you time it just right, and the depression does end, and then there's a boom and you make a fortune and it feels great. That all that personality they took out of the game, because what they did in the second edition was they made it like a clockwork, like you could time it. It's essentially like a track that says the economic climate is going to change in 4 turns, 3 turns, 2 turns, 1 turn. From the designer's point of view, all those weird ups and downs and weird runs were a flaw. And he wanted this to be a predictable thing because he felt it made the game tighter, and it let everyone experience booms on a consistent basis. So in his mind, he had fixed his game. But man, all of these old-time players were just writing these like wistful, notes on this game, like, oh, I miss the days of this and that, and worse, now you can exploit it because there's no risk to just saying, oh, tomorrow the climate changes, and we've already seen these certain conditions, so we can predict it's going to be these with very good accuracy. So now kind of the speculation part of the game disappeared a little bit. To these people, that was a big loss, and to me as an outside observer, I kind of felt like, oh, that old version sounds great, And again, I don't think 90% of the people that played this new version ever knew or cared, right? So ultimately, this container thing is probably going to be something where all the new players, no one will ever know or care.
Yeah, and then if they play a game that for some reason has 15 extra containers, they're going to go, why is this taking so long? This should have been 3 turns shorter.
Right.
And I think that's the thing to remember, right, is that with games being what they are in terms of the logical component and the mathematic component, a lot of people can argue things like balance, and they can argue the numbers of decisions you have in one space versus the other.
Predictability.
But, yeah. But, I always tell people that any sort of, like, all design, doesn't matter what it is, be it game design, doing a building, doing a chair, doing a recipe. All design is this weird blend of very logical problem solving, attaining something that in many cases, we'll say in just as many cases as the goal is a logical mathematical goal that actually has some sort of concrete and measurable value, as many instances it's something completely abstract and borderline emotional, and in some cases unable to be defined until it's there in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what has to be taken into account and stuff. And like with cooking, and I'm, I get in fights with people all the time about cooking, because there's the Pixar film Ratatouille. There's that great scene, where the fella's learning to cook, and she tells him, you always want to be improvising, doing something. He goes, improvise. She was like, no, but you follow the recipe.
Right.
And it's funny because, out here in the real world, you have some people who refuse to follow recipes, and some people who refuse to think that not following a recipe is in any way, shape, or form cooking. Mm-hmm. And like I have one friend that I do a lot of cooking with. We do dinner parties and that kind of stuff, and he gets mad at me all the time because he thinks that cooking is a science, and therefore you follow the formula and you get a result.
No,
right?
That's terrible.
And then I turn around and I go,
cooking is an art. Baking is a science.
See, but even there, I disagree. And I can say this because I worked in a bakery.
Yep, you can say that.
But we'll talk about Han Solo and bread.
Right.
This is going to be the most boring conversation in the world. Anyway, but the thing about cooking is that the formula works if your ingredients are identical.
Yeah.
And I defy you to find two identical ingredients, especially if you're cooking the way that you should, which is not out of boxes and cans.
Yeah, definitely. Moisture content is the number one X factor, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But if you're talking about produce, it is infinitely variable. And not even just in terms of like species of tomato, right? Because there's a million of them. I mean, we have 6 tomato plants outside, and each one of them is different.
Yeah.
But even on the plant, you can pluck 2 tomatoes that are side by side, and they're ripe at the same time, and they can taste different. But then it also differs when you pick them, how ripe they are. I mean, like, there's so much variability, and they go from being so sweet that you feel like you got to brush your teeth to being so bitter that you feel like you just took a shot of vinegar or something. I mean, like, and it's the same plant. So if these things that are in your formula aren't constants, they're variables, but you're using the same formula, that's bad math. Like, no one can tell me that that's good math.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. And even with baking actually isn't as scientific as it is scientific. However, the formulas that you're given aren't as concrete as you think they are, because air pressure matters, humidity matters, which flour you're using and the protein content in your flour matters. Exactly how you define smooth and springy for your dough versus I define it smooth and springy matters. All of these things matter. The air temperature versus how long you let it rest matters. The exact salinity of your mixture versus your yeast content matters. All these things matter. And so if you say, I use the same recipe as you, John, but I got a different thing, then my response is, well, yeah. Like, I would expect that. Like, if you somehow got an identical thing to me, that would be bizarre. Because one salt container to another salt container, even the same brand, may have a slightly different effect. Same thing with yeast. Same thing with flour. How long has it been sitting in my cupboard? All of these things affect it. And so that's why when you do this stuff, you develop this feel, and that's the artistry of it. And we did this at the bakery all the time. You're kneading the dough. It's been made to perfection. In that case, it was my wife was the one who was like doing all the dough prep, right? She's measuring the temperature of water. She's taking the air temperature. She literally was checking humidity, pressures, like, was doing it like a scientist. And then you throw it on the bench to knead it, and you go, this doesn't feel right. So you know what you do? You add flour. Mm-hmm. So there goes your big masterful formula. And you ended up doing it by feel in the clutch anyway, because that's ultimately what mattered. in a weird way, your hands know it better than you can do the math, because the math ends up becoming incredibly complicated because there's so many things that are hard to measure. And that's me talking about food for a lot longer than I should have. But
Oh, I'm starving now.
But yeah, I know, right? I'm so hungry. Now I'm sad. But with games, it's very similar because, sure, balancing your economy in a game is important because you don't want to create an exploit that then becomes the game. However, and this is where the long-winded discussion about food, kind of comes back into play, and that is that the formula for your economy isn't the only thing that actually needs to be maintained, right? Because you have to think about your ingredients. And one of the chief ingredients in a game being played are the players. And the interaction between the ingredients and the formula is largely dependent on how the players are going to interact with what you've presented. That is infinitely variable because not only are individuals different, but groups are different based on where they are, when they are, and all of those things. And trying to peg down exactly how a player is going to perceive something is incredibly difficult to do to actually determine this is the best option. You can say this is the best mathematical option. However, that being the universal best option then is presuming that all players are going to take the best mathematical option as the thing that they are going to do based on their predispositions. And that's just crazy because players play for different reasons and groups play in different ways. And all of that stuff translates directly into how the game shakes out and feels. And so much of how a game feels isn't just the math. I mean, if you look at something, for example, like pacing is as much matching up the tone of a turn versus matching up the length of a turn. Mm-hmm. One of them is mathematical and one of them is emotional. And this is where the artistry comes in. And someone can design a game entirely mathematically, and it can be wonderful. And someone can do something entirely artistically, and it be rock solid mathematically, and vice versa. However, what I tend to forget, and I have to remind myself constantly, is that when I play a game and I experience something phenomenal, someone else may experience that same thing as some sort of torture. I love rolling chain crit hits in Battletech. I love it. It takes 30 minutes.
Well, everything in Battletech takes 30. Battletech takes 30 minutes.
It does. But I find it fascinating, and it is one of my favorite parts of the game. But I know a lot of people loathe it, and it's from a more educated standpoint, you can say it's because there's a disconnect, right, in between why I think I'm there versus why someone else thinks they're there versus what the game is presenting at that moment. And these things can be drilled down on. But the bottom line is, for someone sitting down to play a game for the first time with no expectation, let them enjoy the game. They're either going to or not. And maybe someone's going to find the old version and say, hey, that's the one I want. Or maybe they're not. I don't know. I don't think that there is necessarily, at this moment, without the thing existing, I think it's incredibly hard to find a reason to make a mob to go say it's being done wrong.
Yeah.
I think that you can say that it maybe hasn't been done with the grace that it should have been, perhaps. Or that something could have been done to alleviate the frustration in the already existing player base. And actually, this brings up a point that's a real point, and not me talking about food. And that is that you brought up the brilliant concept with house rules, that house rules fragment the player base. Mm-hmm. And I think that modifying a game and not making it something that's sort of heralded on the title or in the rules, that this is a change, and here's a way to flash back and flash forward. I think that kind of stuff does fragment the player base.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now there will be old school container fans and new school container fans, and never betwixt shall meet, except for me, I guess. But
right, are you going to buy the new container? Because I have the old one. I really don't think at this point I I need the new one.
Well, I don't know what's in it for me.
Well, I was just wondering. I was just gonna say because I'm exhibiting the I'm exhibiting the pitchfork mob mentality because actually you don't have to buy it, John. I can just pull 15 cubes out of my set and we can figure out how it works.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. The thing that I look at here is just that I do think it is a bit of it's not a disservice, right? Because again, the publishers don't owe us anything because they made a game and we bought it and we own it and we play it. The service has already been rendered when the game comes to my house, so it's not a disservice. But I do think that it doesn't really help a brand to divide camps.
Yeah, like to fragment. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that maybe is something that could have been explored. Maybe it's not an issue. Maybe the splinter group isn't as big as it seems like it is or anything. But I don't know. But I also, again, I go back and forth in the same sentence of saying there are tons of reasons to not do it, but I also firmly want to remind people that Mercury Games doesn't owe them anything.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with that. The kind of entitlement angle of it is absolutely present and absolutely distasteful. I wish it wasn't there. But, there's one last game I want to bring into this.
Is it BattleTech? Because I'll talk about BattleTech.
No, because there's we'll do that in episode 3000. I think will be the official battle. That'll be the 3000th episode. Will be our BattleTech special, John.
Well, by then they'll actually have 3,000 different versions of BattleTech, so that'll
right.
be apropos.
Right. But no. This is this is one we've talked about before. Is Liberté, where the newer edition of that, which even the new edition of that is probably 5 or 6 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
But the new edition of that had that dagger variant rule pulled in as the main rule. And as we talked about before, it worked, but it eliminated one of the cool alt win conditions where
it was kind of the shoot the moon mechanic.
Yeah,
right?
where the revolution essentially fails and the nobles win and are reinstalled in power. Or the Royalists win, or whatever the faction's called. And
gosh, that was such a good game.
Yeah, it's a great game, but it illustrates this again because that was another one that was a aftermarket variant that fans came up with, and then Martin Wallace said, "Sure, go for it. If it makes you guys happy, we'll just make that the rule." So that it was just made the rule in the new edition. But over the course of playing, it came out that kind of shoot the moon victory was if not impossible, it was significantly harder to make happen. And this is another example where to anyone who just picked up that game, hey, I heard Liberté was good, let's try it, and just read the rulebook and played, they would never, and without any of that foreknowledge of how it used to be, it is a great game. No one would ever know the difference. But people that had played the old one would realize that one cool thematic fun thing, that little alt history result, never happens anymore. And that would be a sad thing to lose, and when you kind of compare that to these other games we talked about, the thing that strikes me was that it was done for the same reason. And that reason is the dagger variant was invented to stop the market from locking up. And when the market locks up, you have to play from the top of the deck. When you play from the top of the deck, weird things happen. Hence, shoot the moon, right?
Yeah.
And in essence, it was speeding up gameplay because no longer did you have to kind of randomly draw and just deal with what you had. You could, essentially combine cards together and use them. What it is you can kind of take 2 1-power cards and use them as a 2, where in the old rules you couldn't do that. What that ultimately does is it makes players feel like they have more, they're never locked out of a thing, but it also speeds the game up. Because you can just do what you want to do and not have to wait for the card. So the common thread here is all of these games, be it Stronghold, Container, Liberté, these changes are all done to speed up the game. What I'm kind of wondering, is this kind of just part of it? Is it the changing kind of environment of gamers that we're in, that this kind of discord is resistance to that, that the companies are all looking at their games and going, well, if we're going to reprint this, we need to get the playtime down from 2.5 hours to an hour and a half, because the majority of players are only wanting an hour and a half game. So all of these games that are changing, they're doing it to shrink the playtime down from a 3-hour game to an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. Maybe that is this is more of just kind of cultural static, or from that, resistance to change.
There's maybe think about movies and that era where they were taking old movies and colorizing them. Uh-huh. And how really bizarre that was, because the colors aren't real. They're clearly painted on. They're clearly fake. And I think that a lot is lost when you colorize an old film. However, I also love Technicolor because it's so bizarre. And, and everything looks so perfect. It looks like a dream. So, so I love it as a technology, and it's fascinating to see it side by side, but then I also kind of get bummed out, right? But in a way, when I put myself in the shoes of someone who is putting an old film back on film for re-release in a theater or something like that, and now everything has moved beyond black and white, crappy sound, and you have immersive experiences with color and wonderful audio and everything. It sometimes shows all the flaws, right? When you hold it side by side with things that are slick, new, and modern. And how many times have we played games at your place, and at the end of it, someone goes, "Wow, that held up well," or "Whoa, that did not age well." And what we're really talking about is not the game. What we're really assessing is how far has this giant box of design tools evolved from this point, right? Mm-hmm. And so when an old game is published, in a weird way, pulling this old Grail game out of, the stacks and dusting it off and putting it back in front of everyone when it's had this huge life of legend. There are amazing games that can do it. We've played them. Mm-hmm. However, there are also equally as many, if not more, maybe less, who knows, I don't know. There are games who just, you play them and you go, wow, I bet in the 70s this was amazing. But right now, we have deck building. So this whole thing shouldn't exist. This part of the game is, ridiculous. Right. Or we've moved beyond dice. Or we now have decks of cards with rules on them, so I don't need this giant manual. Like, whatever the thing is. Because of that, I understand the desire to want to make a game seem like it is as good as everyone remembers by tweaking it a little bit for modern audiences. Yeah. However, I also sometimes just think you make your barbecue the way you want it and you serve it to people. They can like it or not. So I don't know. I understand the impulses, right? Yeah. But I also firmly understand the disconnect between expectation and delivery. So it's tough. But with that said, games are becoming so much more streamlined. And without just a complete rules overhaul, you can't streamline a game. Yeah. However, you can make it shorter so it feels streamlined.
Well, here's my hack for all the publishers that are no doubt listening to this podcast.
Clearly.
The hack is, if you decide to take a classic game that's well regarded and you feel that it is in some way flawed, that you need to change to appeal to modern audiences, what you do is you take that game and you completely retheme it into something else. And then you make the changes. And then you release it as a new game. Hey, kids, look at this new cool thing. And then you kind of wink at the old school players of the old game and go, this was inspired by Game X, a game that has been well regarded for years. And then those people will come try it, and the ones that'll like it will go, hey, yeah, that does feel like it. It's neat. It's a different game, so I'm not mad because it's a different game, but I like what they did here, and then there'll be a couple old curmudgeons that are going to play it and go, blah, 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 this stinks because this stinks because of that, this stinks because of this game is garbage, and then they'll just go away. And I think everybody wins. And that's not just something, that I'm going to take credit for inventing. I mean, this has been done. You know, we played Outpost a few weeks back, you know, and that was cool. It was a game that I think it ages very well, or has aged very well. And it had some kind of clumsy parts, you know.
On the whole, I didn't know that was an old game.
Yeah.
And I was shocked when I found out how old it actually was. However, when told how old the game was, the parts that seemed clunky, I went, oh, that's why. Because this was the going way to handle this problem at that time. Yeah. So it made sense.
Yeah, the tech hadn't been invented yet to change it. You know, but that game has been released as a Euro called the Scepter of Zavendor. And it's completely rethemed. Instead of setting up space mine colonies, you are kind of fairy tale creatures harvesting magic jewels, right? But all the things that people found kind of off-putting about that old Outpost game, they fixed with all their Euro fixes. And if they would have released that as Outpost, like, here's the new Outpost with catch-up mechanics and limited kind of currencies and, you know, limited auction phases or whatever, people would have just lost their mind. But instead, they go, that's a pretty neat rendition. I don't really care for fantasy, so I'm just going to play the old one, but cool. And they walked away. Like, there was no outrage about it, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, and there's been others, but I mean, I think that's just the magic bullet for that, is just, they should have made container rails or something, right? And it would have been about doing the exact same thing, manufacturing goods and then shipping them via train to their location and being auctioned. And it would have done the exact same thing. And no one would have, this whole thing would have been avoided. I mean, I truly believe that.
Yeah. You solved the problem. But since you did the courtesy of helping the publishers out, yes. I'm going to help the player base out.
All right.
And I'm going to do that by saying to anyone who is, you know, really struggling with this, what I suggest is go outside on just a beautiful clear night. Maybe it's a little cool, the wind is crisp. Look up at the stars. And in this actual sky, imagine the metaphor that every single one of these twinkling lights is a person who doesn't give a crap about your opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm the moon.
You're the moon. And cut.
Yep.
Shut that down.